Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's roundtable entitled Sadik Jalal-Azm, Self-Criticism After Defeat, what we have learned 60 years later. This is a really, I think, a superb and a unique roundtable that we've been envisioning. I think Franck and I thought about this with Amir together back in March at this point. And so it's really my pleasure that we're able to come to fruition. We have really a phenomenal roundtable this morning with no necessarily order of importance or qualifications, but we have a great panel. I'll start with my friend Franck Salameh here is to my left. Next to him is Al-Azm, Sadik's son, Professor Rabil from FAU, and my good friend David Schenker from the Washington Institute. All have been studying as prolific observers and researchers on the area of Lebanon and Syria. Sadik's legacy is extremely important in a lot of the context as we're now looking at Syria post-Assad, and there's a great deal to discuss with all of that. It's also worthy of note, and Michelle actually mentioned this yesterday in her introduction, that the connection between Sadik and Fuad Ajami, who actually wrote the foreword to Sadik's book, which is also, I'm sure it will be brought up here in the comments. So really, without further ado, panel, it's all yours. Franck?
Thank you, Asaf. Thank you all for being here early this morning. Thank you, ASMEA, for making this possible. Thank you, Asaf and Alex, for being the real éminence grise behind this project. Thank you for my colleagues for volunteering their time and their expertise and their memories about Sadik Jalal-Azm. Rather than acting as a traditional moderator, what I'll do this morning is give brief bios of each of my colleagues and then give a couple of opening remarks of my own, and then open it up to the panelists, and hopefully we'll have time. We should hopefully have time for Q&A. To my immediate left, Dr. Al-Azm, son of our guest of honor. Amr is a tenured professor of Middle East history and anthropology at Shawnee State University in Ohio, having also had appointments at Georgetown in Qatar and Qatar University. He is a widely solicited commentator on Syria and the Middle East, current events. His main research focus is on threats to cultural heritage, looting and trafficking of cultural property, antiquities, and terrorism financing. He is founder and director of a number of bodies that deal with the protection of cultural heritage. One of them, Athar, I think, is connected to the UNESCO. To the immediate left of Dr. Al-Azm is my friend and hero, Dr. Rabil. He is Chastain Johnson Middle Eastern Studies Distinguished Professor and Professor of Political Science at Florida Atlantic University. He is a prolific author. I don't know how he does it, but I always say I want to be Robert when I grow up, and it never happens. In any case, Robert has written dozens of scholarly articles, op-eds, etc. He has at least half a dozen academic monographs, and he is also widely solicited in national and international media, ranging from the ABC, CBS, BBC to Al Jazeera and other outlets. While Amr is the son of Sadik Jalal-Azm, Robert is his former roommate, so we'll also get that
insights.
That kind of insights. And last but not least, David Schenker to the left of Robert is a diplomat and Middle East old hand whom we no longer introduce at ASMEA because he doesn't He doesn't need introduction. He is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute and director of the Linda and Tony Rubin Program of Arab Politics at the Institute. He is likewise author of dozens of scholarly articles, essays, op-eds, and policy watches. And we likewise look forward to hearing his insights on the guest of honor. So I had a couple of prepared remarks. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll give you a little biography of Sadik Jalal-Azm and a biography of the book that this conversation will be featuring today. It was first published in 1968, Self-Criticism After the Defeat. Oftentimes we hear, books should not be read by their cover, but this is an exception. This is a book that should be read by its cover. This is the first instance in any context in the Arab world, in the Arabic-speaking universe, where a defeat is called a defeat and not used circumlocutions and euphemisms to call it something else. You're all familiar with the word Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. 1967, in Arabic media and political and intellectual discourse, 1967 was referred to as naksa. Almost a homophone of nakba with one letter change, and naksa means setback. Sadik Jalal-Azm was the first intellectual who said, no, this is a defeat. And so self-criticism after the defeat, not after the naksa. And this, in a sense, opened the floodgates of Arab intellectuals, poets, journalists, trying out that word, defeat, in their writings, sounding it out, as if in a babble, like little kids trying to test out a new word that they're learning. Because defeat does not exist in the Arabic linguistic or intellectual lexicon. We're cultures of courage and honor, and courage, honor, hectoring, defiance are all words. It's a super virile culture, if you will. So all of these words in Arabic have the sense of manhood. So courage is manhood, hectoring is manhood, defiance is manhood. Literally, it's doing things like men. And here comes this man who says, no, enough is enough. We need to start facing reality with real words, not invented words. And he's Bergsonian in that sense. He was calling for a sense of energy, for élan vital in the Bergsonian sense, and calling for naming things by their names in a Albert Camus type of discourse, meaning, not naming things by their names contributes to the madness of our world, the sadness of our world. So I'm going to stop here. I have a few other remarks that I would like to interject, but let's open it up to you guys, and we'll take it from there.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
All
You're the son.
I am the son. It's not always easy being the son of Sadik Jalal-Azm, It's I come from a long line of academics, and I spent the first half of my life trying to escape being an academic, and lo and behold, here I am, sitting on a desk as an academic. Malish. It is what it is. Growing up in a household with Sadik was Anfaus, my mother, both, highly intelligent and very intellectual. My mother was a professor of English literature. My father, obviously, was a professor of philosophy, and I would add political thought as well. And intellectual curiosity and openness and ability to say anything in the household was always allowed. There was never this, you cannot talk to this with your elders, with your betters. I remember even as a child being permitted to challenge older adults when they said something I didn't agree with or didn't like. And I'm talking as a child, like 5-year-old child, which made me a bit precocious at times, perhaps, at least from the perspective of the other adults. And they would sometimes even complain to my mother, "Did you hear what your son said to me?" And she would say, "Yes, well, did he say something wrong?" No, but he shouldn't, but he's too young to say it. Anyway, yani. So there was always this openness and ability to broach and talk about anything we wanted in the house. There was no kind of taboos or boundaries that, such things cannot be spoken of in our house. So when the invasion of, or let's say, I don't want to call it, actually invasion is the wrong word. When the war of 2006 happened between Hezbollah and Israel, there was a debate in our household, and how is that going to appear? And is it what defines a victory? What defines a defeat? And how do we justify either or? And for those of us who remember the experiences at the time, everybody, at least from the Arab, Palestinian, Lebanese side, were framing it at just survival is enough. The fact that the Israelis were not able to repeat what they did in 1982, whether they wanted to repeat in 1982 or not, is neither here nor there. But the whole kind of, and the way the war was being told and framed and related. And I remember discussions with my father, and my father was shaking his head and saying, "No, this is no victory. There is no victory here." And after the war ended, if you remember, it was sold and promoted and told and retold as al-Nasr al-Ilahi, the divine victory. Basically, Hezbollah had achieved a divine victory, and to criticize, even just say anything slightly sort of outside that line would have been a form of heresy. And my father took that on with consequences, and I will explain that in a minute. But in those conversations, back and forth, and I was kind of on the fence then, on the one side. Yes, well, look, they did score some, I mean, you have to also give some credit to the fact that they were able to fight back, that they were able to sort of withstand what, a war that so many Arab armies supposedly should have been able to and didn't, and failed in 1967 and even in 1973 and later on. And that's when the idea of the book came up. And I said, your book, which had been out of print since the 70s, early 70s. I think the last print was in 71 or 72. And literally unavailable, except, like if you could find I think we had a couple of scratty copies in the house, and that was it, in Arabic. And I was like, people should reread that book. I think you should think about having it republished. And so in 2007, the book was republished in Arabic by then the widow of Mamdouh Hedwan, who had established a publishing house under his name. And it was a very close friend of our family. With a foreword where my father does actually, in the Arabic version, reference the 2006 and what happened there. I think that kind of brought back both the sense of, from 67 to 2006, did anything change? And the truth of the matter is, when we reflect on it even further, no. The same rhetoric, the same focus, the same approach. This is a Nasr Ilahi. This is a victory. There's no, even though Nasrallah himself, in a moment of weakness after what happened in 2006, briefly mentioned that had I known what was going to happen to Lebanon, the damage, I might have not done what I did. Even though, but that was quickly turned over, and it also changed the direction of how the Syrian regime and Bashar al-Assad's regime dealt with Nasrallah. Suddenly he was elevated to an equal. Under the father, Hezbollah and Nasrallah were never seen, they were seen as clients. They were not seen as equals. After 2006, Bashar embraced Nasrallah and elevated, and you would see pictures of him and Nasrallah together, on the posters, on the, part of the whole propaganda thing. And the Syrian regime embraced the idea, the notion of the Nasr al-Ilahi, and made it part of their own sort of discourse and narrative. So much so that because my father started to speak out about it, and actually at one point in some public lecture mocked it. I think it was in the Assad Library, what then was called, now we changed the name to the National Library. But back then it was called the Assad Library. And shortly after that, my father, for the first time, got into serious trouble with the regime. Until then, the regime had always given my father a certain amount of leeway and space to write and say what he wanted. It was kind of like, it was almost used as an excuse. When someone would challenge the Syrian regime about its human rights, they would say, well, look, we allow Sadik Jalal-Azm to speak and write freely when none of you, when no other Arab state would even let him enter their country. Yeah, I'm thinking here of this, 70s and 80s, when he was banned literally from every Arab state. And suddenly, they closed down on him. They closed down on him really hard. They forbade him from writing. They forbade him from travel. They withdrew his passport. And he only had a Syrian, until the day he died, he only had a Syrian passport. And that was by intent. It was not accidental. He chose not to take on he could have easily gotten a second nationality from any number of countries that he had visited or worked in or lived in. And he always chose not to. That was his thing. But the regime really, closed things down for him and made it very hard. And in the end, I remember taking him to see a senior general in the Mukhabarat in 2009, where, he and I were clearly told, this is the last time we will give you an exit, and don't come back. So Sadik actually, was exiled from Syria in 2009. He went to live in Beirut, and then after the events of 2011 and 2012, basically left Beirut because it was no longer safe for him and went to live in Germany, and actually in 2016 passed away in Berlin. So even though the book and its impact and its shock was originally sort of written about the War of 67, the story continues and into 2006, and then in 2007, and then 2008 and 2009. And here we are again today when we were sitting down with ourselves and thinking about what we would do for a roundtable. I said, well, given what happened on October 7th, and then the ramifications of that in terms of events for Lebanon and Syria after that. And I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again today. The irony of all this is that despite all the efforts of everyone else to try and somehow contain the threat of Iran, the threat of Hezbollah, the horrors of the Assad regime, it took an Israeli overwhelming response to the events of October 7th and Sinwar's folly to finally liberate the Lebanese from the tyranny of Hezbollah and liberate the Syrians from the tyranny of Assad. Because had they not destroyed Hezbollah, had they not pushed Iran back and out, we would have never kind of gotten to the point. Now, with where we are today, the question is, can we somehow get ourselves together and move forward and try to make right what should have been done right so many decades ago? Well, we wait and see. It is the choice of the new generation. I will end by saying, you know, in many ways, at least for Syria, my father's generation enabled Assad to not only reach power, but to hold on to power by simply ignoring the fact and looking down. The story was, who are these peasants from the villages who come down? You know, we'll have them for breakfast when we're ready for them. Don't worry, we'll take care. My generation, for looking the other way and not dealing with it when Assad was really securing his hold in the 10 years, first 10 years of his rule, from 1970 to 1982, so 12 years. And then in the 90s. And then it took this generation to rise up. And now what will they do? Will they squander that again? That chance, that opportunity they have in Lebanon and in Syria, and possibly even in other parts of the Middle East? We will wait and see. Anyway, I will pass on to Robert now.
Thank you, Amr. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me on this panel. I have really one of the best experiences with Sadik, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you how it happened. I was a student completing my PhD at Brandeis, and it was on Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. And Professor Levy, blessed his memory. Really, me and Franck, he used to be really one of a kind. So he told me, he called me, Robert, come here. I would like to ask you a favor. I told him what? He told me, I want you to come, the next day. I have Sadik Jalal-Azm, professor. And I told him, oh, yeah, I know Sadik Jalal-Azm, but I didn't really know him. So he told me, I want you to go to the airport with me and pick him up. I told him, of course, let's go. So we were driving and talking about Sadik. And then, yes, I knew of him, but I didn't really know him well. So at the airport, we saw him, and I saw this long man, round face, smiling. He has a beautiful smile, hi. And Levy, as a matter of fact, when he was coming, he told me, listen, he doesn't look that Arabic. He looks like Turkic more. Really, I'm sorry to say that, And he told me, listen, and he told me something, is that the background of Al-Azm family, it has some Turkic, gene in it. So again, I met him, very congenial guy, very nice guy, and really, I myself, unlike him, and I didn't grow up in an academic family. My mother was forced out of school. She was too beautiful. And my grandfather was, a little bit conservative as a Christian Maronite, really, And my father, as a matter of fact, really his father died. His American father died when he was 3 months old. So really, and I left school early, so I didn't have this engagement, this give and take as I was grow up. I grew up mainly, I volunteered for the Red Cross, and when I came to United States, I worked in nightclubs, this is what I did. So mainly being with Sadik, really it was an experience. And the experience, started when Sadik was given a room at Brandeis. And then he went and he said, listen, and then he took a liking toward me. And then he mentioned, is there any other place? And Levy asked, well, Robert lives alone. And he said, oh, really? Do you live alone? And I said, yes. He told me, how many bedrooms you have? I told him 2 bedrooms. He said, listen, then I'll be your roommate. Said, Okay, so he's the one who said, and that started my experience with Sadik. And let me tell you something, probably he knows about him as the one. He didn't watch TV. No, he didn't watch TV.
I grew up in a house with no TV.
Really. And me, I love
a TV.
Yeah, and I love TV. You want to watch up, especially the actresses, what they are doing. This and that. What's happening in the world. And here you have Sadik mainly, and I was doing my dissertation, completing. So mainly it was all about discussion and debate. And he knew I was Maronite, he was a Sunni, he was open, very open. And really we touched on many subjects that really were kind in the back of my mind, and he always, pushed them to the front of my mind. Something about his habit, he ate also one meal, like you. And if he ate a big meal in the noon, mainly in the evening, he will tell me, let's go get vanilla, yogurt, and Granny Smith apple. He likes those two. And of course, he liked to go, especially, and he used to take me with him, really. He used to go to MIT when MIT was led, the political science by Philip Khoury, and to the Center for Middle East Study at Harvard with Lenore Martin. Yes. So we always went there with him. And I can tell you some of the debate, debate, mainly after the defeat. Yes, he really broke all kind of benchmark. He said it what it is. It's a defeat. And for him, not only it was a military defeat, it was a moral defeat. It was a social defeat. It was a comprehensive defeat, really, for him, period. And this is where I agreed with him. I grew up in Lebanon, and I know, really, yes, it was beautiful in the 60s and 70s, but Bashir Ismail said it, and said it right. It was a farm, and I still think it was a farm, and it still is a farm. And this is really when I am on TV or when I'm lecturing, I say, listen, you have two choices between a farm and a quasi-democracy. I'm not going to say democracy. So you have a big decision to make. So the point is, now, this is how he spoke about it. But then he saw a kind of hope in the Middle East. And that hope mainly, when we spoke about it, 1990, the Gulf War. The Gulf War for him was important. And I'll tell you why was important for him. Because, going to the peace conference, speaking with the Israelis, and for the Arabs, for him, as a matter of fact, the way he saw that, he used to tell me, and we used to debate this, it wasn't that, they admitted defeat. They recognized that they could not defeat Israel. And that's a big difference between the two. Between admitting defeat, admission of defeat, and recognizing we cannot defeat it. Also, as a matter of fact, he saw that the Palestinians did, and of course I fully agree with him, they did a strategic mistake by siding with Saddam Hussein. That was huge, mainly especially after the expulsion of many Palestinians from Kuwait and from the Gulf. And this is where he started, as a matter of fact, to feel there is a hope. There is a hope. Now, what he was worried about all fundamentalists. He was really a secular. I wouldn't say he was atheist in the full sense of the word, but he was a secular. He really was worried about the religious in Israel, mainly the far religious, and he was worried about the Sunni fundamentalists. Anything that was fundamentalist to him, he was really concerned about it and worried about it. And again, when I still remember very well when Rabil was murdered, he was really upset and really, as a matter of fact, and he was worried about the peace process, because the peace process for him was the opening, of a new page in the Middle East. He knew that. Something about it. He knew that the Arabs will always speak about Saladin. He always gave me this. Robert, they all love to be Saladin. Saddam Hussein would love to be like Saladin. Hafiz al-Assad would like to be like Saladin. Libya, Muammar al-Gaddafi. They all want to be Salah ad-Din, and they want to all go and wrest Jerusalem from the Israeli, not from the
a non-Arab Kurd.
Huh?
A non-Arab Kurd.
Yeah. So really, he knew that this is something probably in the DNA. But also he looked at the Arab. He looked and he said, listen, we spoke about the golden age in Spain. We discussed it and how the Arabs and Jews really. We spoke about, Baghdad when it was really this culture, this hub of cultural city. We spoke of Beirut at one time, Beirut, Sittadini, he used to go to Beirut a lot, really. So mainly it was hope for him. Now, the way I see after the defeat myself, and the way I look at it, and when I look back and I look at those times, and by the way, really, we love to go to Harvard Square, and we both had, we loved good food, and we always loved good sights, whether it is natural or what is whatever good sights, really. We loved it. As a matter of fact, walking down Harvard, sometimes we used to walk from Porter Square to Harvard Square, and he used to love that. And he used to love, really, to look at magazines. At Harvard Square, you have, this magazine place, tons of magazines, from France, from Italy, from everywhere. And I used to tell him, Sadik, come on, man, really, we have to go. And he used to love, and let me know, stay here. Come on, let's go. Okay, we've been staying here for 45 minutes, and sometimes it's cold, really. So this is Sadik. He used to love to look at the newspaper. And then, again, there is something with him. He used to like to have fun, especially going to restaurant. And I used to take him especially to the Averov, some of my member of my family, they had a Greek restaurant, the Greek nightclub. And it was the largest in New England. So he loved to go there. He loved watching the belly dancer, your father. Really. Oh, really? He loved it. And of course, I made all the belly dancers go next to him and put, the bed next to him. So now, when I look back and I say, listen, okay, Sadik Jalal-Azm, self-criticism, and today. And this is what I think myself about the Arab world, really. I think, yes, especially in the Arab Gulf, there is, as a matter of fact, I believe myself, there is now a new thinking. And that new thinking, somehow, I feel that it's spilling over throughout the Arab new generation, the Arab youth. And in that, listen, peace with Israel is coming. We have issues with Israel, don't get me wrong. And I saw those issues, if you remember, if you saw the Mondial, and then how they were, mainly some Israeli were there, and they really were not welcome by some media. I don't know if you saw that. But overall, I see myself in the Arab Gulf, really, even I think myself, even Mohammed bin Salman knows that it's coming, but it's about timing. So it's not about if, it's about when. So really, I feel that, they don't want to speak about the defeat. They'll speak, okay, let's not speak about it. We recognize Israel, we cannot defeat it, for more than one reason. But let's go ahead and have a new page with Israel. So I think, and I hear him, as a matter of fact, when I meet him, I have today one PhD student. She was sent by Mohammed bin Salman, and she's graduating, really. And I have other Saudis that are studying with me, and they give me a new, new look into Saudi Arabia. And I always, when I think about it, I think about Sadik, really. So I think that in the Gulf region, there is today a movement, I would say, a generational movement toward having peace with Israel. Don't get me wrong, still the Palestinian issue is very big. The Palestinian issue is really, it weighs on them. And I think myself, they don't care if they're going to have the West Bank or Judea of Samaria, or they're going to have this or have that. Mainly, they would like to have this problem somehow resolved. And I don't care how. Now, on the other hand, I worry about, for example, political Islam. I think this is where they did not learn about defeat. I don't think they are going to admit defeat. I don't think they're going to recognize that, they cannot defeat Israel, which is important, and I made the difference. And I think that, when I look today at Syria, I see, yes, you have a former Islamist, or Salafi jihadi, and he's a pragmatist. So probably within Sunni radical Islam, you can see that, but I worry about them a lot. In Shia Islam, I don't see that. I see they are, for time. I see that I see now the statement by Pezeshkian, by Khamenei, by Naim Qasim. Really, they are not recognizing even defeat. 1/4 of Lebanon destroyed. So many people really, now they are homeless or they are refugees. And still, they say, in their discourse, listen, we have not been defeated. And he has to say that, listen, we showed the Israelis that you cannot defeat us. And this is really, I myself say it. Even I argue with Hezbollah people or pro-Hezbollah people. Even on Israeli TV, they put me pro-Hezbollah, And I don't know from where they come from, really from an alternate universe. I argue with them, but still, they have this belief. And then they have this thing about we are all Karbala-iyun. Mainly we are all from Karbala, and Karbala is us. They define themselves that, listen, either we are going to be dying as martyr like Imam Hussein, or we are going to live, and this is where you come, all this Arabic and Islamist. So they add the Islamist big words and the nationalist big words. So you have Salah ad-Din with somebody else. You have Salah ad-Din with, with those, leaders. So this is something I worry about. And I think really, I don't know what United States and Israel, they are going to do to see that, to see this, resolved. On the other hand, this is what I worry myself. I worry again about Egypt being the largest, country in the world. The populous country in the Arab world. And my interaction with them, yes, of course, you have an elite, you have an intelligentsia open, but down to the popular level, I worry about them, and I still think that they are very much, they haven't, despite the peace process, despite, really this, at some point, a good relationship on the intelligence level, let me see it this way, probably David here will speak about it more, but I've been in some meetings where I saw, really, and what I see is that on the popular level, still, really, they haven't yet kind of fathomed, the idea that, listen, you could have dinner with an Israelis and go enjoy, eat some hummus, baba ganoush, some shish tabouk, and then after, let's go have a drink somewhere. I don't think they have come to realize this, to fathom this thing. So I worry about Egypt. I worry about Algeria too. Algeria, their discourse, when I listen to them, when I listen to their news, and this is where, as a matter of fact, I see that in certain area of the Middle East, the Gulf, I think they have really come to a conclusion, although it hasn't been, really completely, it's not full, total, but they say, listen, we have changed. And the youth generation look in a very different way than the other places. North Africa, Morocco is different. Also, I was somehow surprised by the demonstration in Morocco, but I think it's different. Tunisia is different. So North Africa, from Egypt to Algeria, and especially those two poles, Algeria and Egypt, I worry about the popular level. So I think they don't yet admit of defeat. They feel that, you have, certain recourse, Now, regarding the Levant is a trouble. Is really full of contradiction. As example, I'll speak about Lebanon. In Lebanon now, you have people, as a matter of fact, beside me and Franck, really. So we are no longer the exception now. So you have people now, from Christian, from Sunni. Even the president at one time said, and recently, listen, we have to speak with Israel. And I know that from my interaction with them. Yes, Israel, they admit you have a lot of collateral damage. They don't like that. They really are unhappy with that. But you have a certain realization. Listen, they are our neighbor. They are here. It's about time, forget the defeat, forget this and this. They don't want to speak about defeat or non-defeat. They say, listen, we have to live, period. We are their neighbor. Let's come to some kind of a conclusion. And I was happy with that, because sometimes in Lebanon, I feel their collective memory, and it's sad on one hand, and on the other hand is good. Why? Everything, when it comes to the collective memory in Lebanon, is directly swept under the rug. Immediately swept under the rug. They don't like to go, and discuss what happened in the past. Really. So from Lebanon side, I think, except Hezbollah, which is really a big problem, not only for Israel, for Lebanon, a huge problem. Now, regarding Syria, I believe he gave a good, mainly a kind of view of Syria. Syria, I worry about Syria. And I think that the people of Syria really, I wouldn't say they are like Egypt. I think some would like to have, a relationship with Israel, especially the Druze now. You hear Al-Hajri and you hear the others, You know, you hear about the Kurds, you hear about the Christians. You know, I have a cousin of mine, he's married to a Syrian lady from Wadi Nasara. So I speak with him, and really now today, they are not like upset about the loss of Assad because they felt probably he's better than the Islamist jihadi. But now they look at Israel from a very different perspective, completely different perspective. So they are open to the idea that, listen, you know, we don't want to speak about the defeat, really. And Jordan, when I look about Jordan really, this is, again, it's worrying for me. And why it's worrying for me, you know, yes, the Hashemite has been good, but mainly, you know, the demography in Jordan is changing. And I feel that if you don't have some time of a change, you know, some time of a, you know, prospect toward the Arab-Israeli conflict, Jordan, I think I'm going to worry about it. And I know that the United States is worrying about it. I know that our intelligence now in Jordan are very much doubled. I know that we have jets in Jordan. And Jordan serves as a buffer zone, let's not forget, between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So this is what I worry about. So overall, to wrap it up, Sadik Jalal-Azm. Sadik Jalal-Azm said what nobody said before him, really. He broke a lot of taboo, period. And Sadik Jalal-Azm really in the 1990s was happy with the prospect of having peace with Israel, really. Sadik Jalal-Azm also was worried, you know, even when he left, he was worried about all fundamentalism on all sides. As a matter of fact, he couldn't bear them all, period. Civic, secular, religion is in your house. You know, this is how he was. And of course, you know, he saw some rays of hope with the new generation, Sadik Jalal-Azm. That's Sadik Jalal-Azm. And I am really sorry that I lost a friend, really. And something about him also, you know. He was a philosopher in the sense, different than other philosophers, really. I didn't meet many philosophers growing up, and I didn't live in a household, you know. I can tell you this. My father was the bodyguard of Sheikh Sabah al-Salam, you know, at one time, before he got married with my mom, because my grandfather told him, listen, absolutely you are not working in Kuwait, and forget this. You want to come here, and you want to stay here. So they got him a job with General Motors, you know. And so my point is, I didn't grow up with much intellectuals in my family. But he appealed to me. Yes, he was an intellectual, but he was down to earth, and he had the good insight into the people and how they really looked and how he felt they believed their aspiration should be. And this is what made him, as a matter of fact, really successful, and this is what endeared him, as a matter of fact, to the intelligentsia, to the elite, but also, you know, on the popular level, to Joe and Muhammad and Ali. He really, as a matter, and I still remember very well, whether at Harvard or MIT or at Brandeis, he was really well liked, really. So he's a loss, my friend, you know, but you are here and you represent him in thought and in DNA, okay? So thank you for listening to me.
If I may just add one little remark before giving the mic to David, and ordinarily I would never venture to speak after Robert because I can never recover from Robert's interventions. Speaking of Sadik Jalal-Azm's humility, he had what you could define as epistemic humility and also lineage humility. This family is a family of aristocrats. You wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I'm not. I mean, they are old Damascene aristocrats, and Sadik published in multiple languages, taught at multiple universities, namely our alma mater, Brandeis. But I imagine if he were to write his own biography, he would define himself as an Arab from Syria and a professor at Damascus University. He would not mention the Harvards and MITs and Brandeis, and correct?
Correct, but he would definitely mention that he's an aristocrat.
And
he has on repeated times.
Which leads me to a story I've heard in multiple versions He was invited, I think, by the president, early 80s, by the president of southern Yemen to a dinner at one of the poshest, I don't know it.
No.
Qasr al-Nubala.
Yes, it was there, but it was when Baker came to Syria during the Clinton period.
Okay.
Do you remember that visit?
Yeah.
It was then, and he was invited to be at the lunch at Qasr al-Nubala.
Qasr al-Nubala, the palace of the aristocrats, the nobles.
Yeah.
So here comes this guy in his old beat-up Citroën de Chevaux, right, coming to this parking lot where I imagine had, Mercedes and Lamborghinis, and I don't know what you have in Syria. And he was trying to squeeze his Citroën de Chevaux, between these flashy cars, and he's being gestured to by the police, the guardians, to move along, man. This does not belong to you. So, the de Chevaux is, the window is half a window. You just open it, you flip it up, and it sticks. And he sticks his head out, and he said, I should tell you something. I am probably, of all of these people at lunch, I'm probably the only real aristocrat. In a culture of words, in a culture of hasab wa nasab, as they say in Arabic, lineage, and family, the true mark of aristocracy, I think, is humility, and he did have that humility. He had,
He lived with me, for God's sake.
Humility
You know what I mean?
and
Come on.
and
I'm no
epistemic.
aristocrat.
Huh?
I am no aristocrat. He stayed with me. He wouldn't leave me alone.
Exactly, and I mean, if you look, and now that Robert mentioned when he picked him up from the airport, I remembered the first time I met him, and I was preparing for this, I was trying to see whether he was really tall, whether he was really a towering figure, because that's how I felt. And I'm not, I'm not short, but you really feel crushed next to him, and yet he was so accessible, so humble. So sorry, and thank you, and David, please.
Thanks. Very pleased to be here. It's an honor to talk about Sadik and to be on a panel with all these really great friends and colleagues and amazing scholars. I only met your father a small number of times. I know him primarily through his work that we all would read, and interviews that were prolific and erudite and on point. When I was asked to be on this panel and talk about the book, because I don't have the personal stories, I'm thinking it's a remarkably prescient book. It's path-breaking. It's, intellectually risk-taking, right? When he was writing this, he knew that this was going to be something that shook the community and that provoked a real response. He had a subsequent critique that got him jailed in Lebanon or whatnot on religion. But this is along those lines. And I think, he's really, this type of intellectual risk-taking is, what the pantheon of Middle East scholars does, right? You think of Fuad's The Arab Predicament. You think of, Bernard Lewis, What Went Wrong. You talk about Martin Kramer, Ivory Towers, really saying things, truth to power, and, damn the consequences. And the great ones are great because what they write is innovative and stays relevant. These are themes that are difficult to talk about, and to put it succinctly, is really, I think, something that is not easy to do. Certainly, self-criticism is remains relevant and thought-provoking today. It's really hard to imagine, actually, this kind of work being produced today. We all know the penalties associated with political incorrectness, right? the critiques and discussions of mindset, of culture. God knows we can't talk about culture anymore, about backwardness, about what your dad saw as a Arab avoidance of responsibility for the defeat. It's what Ajami wrote in his foreword. He said, he saw the Arab defeat for what it was, an indictment of Arab culture. Right? I'm reminded of this great article, and I was looking it up on my phone earlier when Amr was speaking. I'm sure Cole Bunzel knows the name of the article, but Hisham Sharabi wrote it. Maybe it was a part of his biography, and he's talking about his student years at AUB and about how you couldn't question any of the teachers, and there was an authority, a hierarchical structure, and no questioning of the teachers, rote memorization. He had this ruthless critique, but he was doing that from the United States, and it was a biography that he wrote in the 80s or early 90s. So this is unusual. So instead, when Sadik was writing about this, he was critiquing sort of the reliance on conspiracy theories to justify the defeat rather than, say, a vastly more technically advanced Israeli army and air force, a country that was more prepared. As he saw it, as was mentioned before, it wasn't a setback, but a defeat, and it had to be reckoned with. And most famously talked about how the Russians were defeated by Japan back in 1905, and how the Russians subsequently couldn't believe it, and they started to do sort of a relentless self-examination and proceeded to try and modernize. The Arabs, he said, focused on Israel's treachery, right? The dishonor of the surprise attack in 1967. They embraced victimhood. They politically stagnated. The Russians, learned from their defeat in 1905. The Turks, unlike the Arabs, learned from their defeat after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Right? You had Mustafa Kemal Ataturk modernizing, reforming Turkey from top to bottom, the secular democratic republic, professionalization of the military embrace of Western technology, etc. But there was no such introspection after 1967, or no positive program. There was no institution building, and no modernization of militaries or doctrine, adaptation of more modern warfighting approaches. There was little appreciation of how the hierarchical culture and lack of initiative by enlisted men on the battlefield undermined military effectiveness. And this, of course, remains the same today, right? Enlisted men come from different positions than the officer corps. For people here that study militaries, this is that in the United States, the NCO, non-commissioned officers, the enlisted, they are trained, they are encouraged and rewarded for showing initiative. They are in charge of millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment, and they make decisions. They oftentimes know more than the officer corps because they are the boots on the ground. This was not, in 1967, a matter of military material. It wasn't that Israel had a vastly superior armed forces. It was a cultural thing. Since 1967, the view of Israel in the region has changed, but only marginally. I think among many, Israel remains a temporary colonial entity. We'll get back to that. But, I mean, you look at this, and I think it's been sort of touched on already, but for Hassan Nasrallah, right, Israel was a spider's web, right? You just have to pull the thread, and it will unravel. If you go, I'm sure it's destroyed now, but if you went to Melita, Hezbollah's, museum in the south of Lebanon, the outdoor museum, there is a destroyed Merkava tank with its turret that is twisted in a knot, and it's amidst a metal spider's web. You know, this is like the image that Hezbollah had or has of the region. Hamas thought that Israel could be conquered somehow on October 7th, that its forces might eventually advance toward Jerusalem, that this was a brittle Israeli state. In Iran, until recently, they had a doomsday clock for Israel that was ticking down the hours, days, weeks, months, and years until Israel would disappear. Now, of course, because of the lack of electricity in Tehran, the clock stopped. But this is an ongoing theme. The axis of resistance persists in these beliefs, notwithstanding the defeats that it deems setbacks, naksas, not hazimas. It's just like 1967. For those of you Star Wars fans out there, as Obi-Wan Kenobi might have said, the denial is strong with these ones, right? It persists. So, Nasrallah, as we heard before, as Robert mentioned, after $6 billion of damage in 2006, right? They still called this a divine victory, right? They could fire 100 crappy rockets into Israel per day after 34 days, and it's a divine victory. Naim Qassem, the current leader of Hezbollah, he says, the resistance victory over Israel is its faith, youth, women, children, elders, offerings, blood of its leaders, and the sacrifice it offers. That's how the resistance prevails, right? The battlefield is littered with thousands of Hezbollahis, right? There are thousands of Hezbollahis without fingers and eyes after the pager operation, and this is somehow a victory. He says that the best things are martyrdom and victory. Victory because we remained on the battlefield, and resistance will persist. This was proof to them, their blood and Lebanon's treasure, that the resistance will persist. The same happened after 1948, when Arabs pointed to Palestinian either being fled or forced out of Palestine, that somehow this is noble because they protected the honor of the women as they fled. Right? This was a crushing defeat. You can't make this up. I mean, the examples of this are legion. Everyone remembers back after the U.S. invasion in 2003 of Iraq, most famously Baghdad Bob, talking about how the Crusaders are being slaughtered one by one as U.S. tanks are rolling into Baghdad, right? Right? It was amazing. Even I was watching the other day, and I think it was Naim Qassem too, in the disarmament pledge by the government of Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah finally after this defeat or setback for Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is talking about Karbala, that we're going to have another Karbala. What happened at Karbala? Right? This was the primordial defeat of the Shia, right, at the hands of the Sunnah. And they're still pointing to this as the victory, right? But you can't make this stuff up. Hamas also frames the Gaza war as a victory, right? They said that, Israel said they were going to eliminate Hamas, but now they're sitting with Hamas and negotiating with them, right? Gaza paid an unimaginable price, they said, but in terms of gain and losses, Israel failed to break the will of the Palestinians, their resistance, and push the people out of the country. So they are sitting on a pile of rubble in Gaza, and this is a victory for Hamas, right? You compare this, really, I think, to Israel, and it's useful, right? After this kind of defeat, we had in 1973, where Israel suffered this remarkable defeat in 73. And they had the Agronaut Commission, right? They do a fact-finding investigation into how Israel was defeated in 73.
2 weeks only.
first 2 weeks.
Yeah, okay. I mean, so it's a victory, but it's a defeat, right? Surprise attack that almost succeeds in taking the Golan, right? That crosses the Suez Canal. This was a defeat, right? So they do a fact-finding commission. They hold people responsible. They offer recommendations. After 2006, 2 years after, they had the Winograd Commission because of Israel's performance in Lebanon was so poor, right? And there are people clamoring in Israel today for an October 7th report to hold those responsible, accountable, whatever. Whether that I'm sure it will eventually happen. But this is about accountability. This is about coming forward and laying out an assessment, an honest assessment. It's about responsibility. It's about the buck stops somewhere, right? It doesn't get thrown into the ether. Now, there are a few exceptions, and Robert touched on this before, among Arab countries where I think the culture has progressed, has changed. Abraham Accords countries, right? Bahrain, UAE, and Morocco, of course, not Abraham Accords, but Abraham Accords adjacent, accepting, right? These countries are the most modern, self-reflective, and successful of states in the Middle East, right? Even Saudi Arabia. But these states, I think, are outliers in the region, right? The other peace partners, Jordan and Egypt, the popular sentiments, I think, continue to reflect the pre-1967 views that Israel is somehow a temporary entity, that they can be defeated, that all you need is Samud, and somehow Israel will go away. Notwithstanding Israel's increasingly successful economy and increasingly dominant military. So very little has changed. I would also say, part of this, the collective memory that is buried. So my good friend in Lebanon, Lokman Saleem, who was murdered by Hezbollah back in 2021, he spent his time as a Shiite academic journalist. He spent his time not only critiquing Hezbollah, but working on collective memory in Lebanon, right? Reminding people of what happened in the Civil War, putting it front and center through his NGO, Omam. But this is the one part of Lebanon that is actually doing this. The collective memory is really buried in Lebanon, not to mention, in Egypt, right? They have a very nice North Korean designed and built panorama of 1973 crossing the Suez Canal. There's no mention of 67. Yeah, you have the North Koreans built one in Damascus as well. There's no mention anywhere of the setback or the defeat of 67. United States, you go to the mall, we got a Vietnam memorial, right? We remember the good, we remember the bad. This is, a broad, a concept that I think, it's important. So, in summation, let me just say, I think, so little has really changed since 67. And as Ajami, wrote in the book, in the foreword, in the English in 2011, he said, Al-Azm had sought to strip Arab thought of its belief in fate and folk tales and superstition. And all he wanted was to push the issue of responsibility. And I think we're still really far from that, which is why, rereading your dad's work, I think, is, remarkable and I think increasingly useful reminder of the region that we deal with and that so many of us want to be a better place. So thank you.
Thank you, David. So before opening it up to your questions, I kept thinking as all my colleagues were speaking of perhaps an intellectual exercise to throw in your laps, the three of you and the rest of you. because it seemed to me that this was a common thread going through the different presentations. Of the three no's of Khartoum, no to peace with Israel, no to normalization with Israel,
no recognition,
no to recognition of Israel. Of the three no's, what do you think would be, first to the three of you, the most crucial, the most important, peace, recognition, or normalization?
The recognition, it's still the denial of reality, right? Israel exists, regardless of whether you recognize it is.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Egypt, look at Jordan. You just mentioned it, in your conclusion. Peace, Egypt, almost 50 years of peace with Israel. What has it produced? I remember a few years ago, I was in Israel. There was the Egyptian ambassador speaking to a group of international academics. It was the Tel Aviv University workshop. He spoke to us, very eloquent, very charismatic, young diplomat, Egyptian diplomat. One of the questions I asked him after he concluded his talk, it was a probing question, whether he was married, whether he had kids, and he said yes, he was married and he had kids. I asked if his kids were with him in Israel. He said yes, they were all of school age. I asked him if they're part of the Israeli school system, and he said no. They have private tutors at home. So here was a diplomat, and usually when you think of diplomats, I went to school in Lebanon in the 1970s. There were a lot of foreign diplomats who went to my school, who were American, French diplomats, etc., who were placed in the Gulf countries, and at the time the Gulf countries were not what they were today, so they sent their kids to school in Lebanon. And what a wonderful opportunity, I told him, for your kids to be in this foreign country learning the ways, the language, the literatures, the normalization. And that's the reason behind my question. Of the three, what is the more important? And you nailed it, normalization.
Can I just a couple of quick comments I just remembered in the conversations. Sadik's book didn't just impact how so many Arabs of his generation kind of thought. It actually impacted also Israeli thinking. And I remember a story when I was on a visit to Israel in 2014, where I sat down one afternoon with what was then a retired Israeli intelligence general, who, as part of the kind of get-together and meeting, handed me a copy of my father's book, Self-Criticism After Defeat, and told me that when this book came out, he read it. It was read in Israel. And their reaction was, oh no, there is someone who can think in that part of the world. No, literally, that's what he said to me. And the copy he gave me was from the Herzliya library. The original copy they had from '67. And it is the only copy I have of my father's book, by the way. Wow. Just so you know. with the original binding, it was rebound. Back then libraries would take paperbacks and rebind them. So that was that. The other thing about DNA, you mentioned Turkic DNA. I did one of those DNA tests a while back to see, just out of curiosity. And I was, being of Arab origin, I thought I would have a significant amount of Arab DNA amongst all the other stuff. I have less than 3% Arab DNA. It was all Anatolian, Turkic, Central Asian, a little bit of Russian sort of
Ashkenazi,
possibly, very possibly, and a whole bunch of Southern European. Probably the Crusades left their mark on my family somewhere along there as well. But 3% Arab, geez, Yani. But really, the point I just wanted to say here was, look, defeat for the Arabs has always been someone else's fault. We see it repeatedly being, from 48, 67, 73, 82, 86, and right the way through until now, until the recent events, the last sort of year or two. It's the West's fault. It's treachery. It's lack of faith in God. It's dissolution, degeneracy. I'd say anything but, and we still refuse to accept that we are also responsible for our own failures, and I don't see that mindset changing anytime soon. And so I think there will always be room for Sadik's book in one way or another, because we will always need to remind ourselves that we need to be critical of ourselves before we are critical of others.